I call this workshop of the Bryan Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, and this workshop has been duly called, and the notice of this workshop has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551. Just a few comments about the functionality today. Those that are in the actual board chamber room are here. There's additional people that are waiting in the hall that will come in and provide information. And then we also have the public is actually down in the training rooms with closed caption TV. One of the initial instructions is that you can speak up. Every board member can speak up. We are running it through this mic, and I believe they tested it and every place was good. Except for Ruthie and Fran, and I don't believe they have a problem speaking up and speaking loud. So if you are in the room and it sounds like we're yelling, we're really not. We're just trying to make sure that everybody can hear and that it gets properly recorded and streamed down to the other room. So at this time we have citizens' comments, and I do not believe at this time we do not have any citizens' comments, so we'll move straight into the agenda on the standing committee updates with the superintendent update.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be with you again. It's been a long time, and even though we have a lot of rules in place, it's good to be together, and it kind of makes you feel hopeful and I guess energized a little bit about what's ahead. As you know, since you approved our first Return to Learn plan, a lot has changed. We've had continual input and changes from the Commissioner's Office and TEA, as well as recently the Attorney General's Office, and we're in constant conversation with the health authorities. So with all of those things, our team has been working furiously to revise, and today you will see those efforts as we will talk about the calendar that we're recommending to you for a change to the August 20th start date. You will also see that we are offering the same 3 options to our families as we always have, but that you will see some additional things, and I'm going to share with you. I believe they're focused in 2 areas. You will see safety, increased safety protocol, and you will see a focus on teachers. And in just a little bit, Dr. Merrill will be going through all of that with you. So my superintendent report kind of dovetails into the first item, which is an update on the Return to Learn plan. I will say to you that I'm also, the other items on the agenda are very important today as you consider calling the bond. And I know that we'll have some good news on that report as to how that affects our community. And so a lot going on. But I just want to mention to you that as we've had the ambiguity and as we go forward, it is very clear to me that we are America and that we are literally in a position where nothing that we do will have everyone agree with it. And I feel like this is, as we know as leaders, for all of us, the hardest place to be, because we're always looking for win-win situations. We're always looking for those types of scenarios, and sometimes it's just not possible. So as we go forward, I think that one thing that's true is when we know our path and it's clear, we take action on it, and people do find comfort in knowing, and that will be the way in which we go forward. And I know you feel the same way. The first thing I would like to do as we now go into update, more of the update, I would like Ms. Johnson is going to pull up the latest commitment form, which is literally, I believe, from this morning. Am I right, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, ma'am.
And so now I want to keep in mind that we asked our community to complete this originally by the end of the day today. So as we stand right now, you will see that we have 9,494 responses. So for us, because we have an enrollment closer to that 16,000 mark, we're looking at about a 62%, 61.69 to be exact, 62% of the families have responded. And remember, this is committing to, I would like my child to learn online. I would like my child to learn face-to-face, or I would like my child in secondary to come in just for those specialized classes, which we termed hybrid. Now, I want to also clarify that the term hybrid has taken on a life of its own across the state and through definition. But at the time in which we did it, we said you would come in for that band class, that football class, you would come in for that welding class, but the rest of the time you were interested in being online. So that's still how we are terming it, because that's the definition we placed out there. So if we look a little closer at elementary, you can see that we have slightly over half of the children, 52.64% of the parents would like to see their children in an on-campus, face-to-face learning environment, while 47.36% would like to see them work online. We go to our intermediate, and it's a little bit flipped, but in a similar range of 45.39% wanting on campus and 54.6% wanting online. As we move to middle school, this is where now the hybrid option became a reality and an option for those families. So we have the three categories with 41% wanting a face-to-face, 47% wanting online, and about 11.5% wanting to be able to come in just for that specialized class. When we go to the high school, we see that it's very somewhat similar, although we have more students wanting that hybrid model, which would make sense because of the activity level and the specialized courses that we have in high school. So you'll see 41.15% on campus, 39% online, and 19.5% wanting the ability to come in just for those courses. So when we look at those numbers, it kind of helps us to plan. And we know that this also affects the safety, because when nearly half or more, depending on the level, are not present in the school, then that will reduce movement and reduce the amount of people within it. So as we go forward, I thought it was important that you got the most up-to-date information. I guess our message to our community is, if you haven't already signed and committed, please do that. Ms. Johnson, do you want to add to that, as it may direct them after today to the campus?
So yes, after today, this afternoon, we'll be switching that phone number over to the campus, and the campuses will be able to take those calls. And if so, for example, if they've changed their mind, now that they see the numbers going down, if they'd like to come back to school in person, the registrar or attendance clerk can now make those changes on the fly. So it looks like, depending on the way the calendar goes, we'll have a few more days. But yes, we want them in soon. And we're using that same information to distribute the laptops. So that tells us what they need.
Yes, thank you. So that's very important that information about their technology needs is a part of that commitment form. Okay. So any questions about this so far before I turn it over to our next speaker?
I have one. It's probably a hard question to answer, but is there do you have any inclination of what the 38%, I guess, will trend toward? Because I would anticipate they might, just thinking, they may trend more towards in class.
That's what we're doing as we do the roll-in right now. We're pulling all the, actually that number, the 9,494 as of this morning, we're pulling those into eSchool this morning. And then all the ones who haven't responded, we're defaulting them to the on-campus, because that's kind of what we're guessing. But, you know, since we haven't heard from them, we can't be 100%, but that's kind of what we're thinking.
Also, as we've had conversations with our principals, there's a lot of conversation from them to families, answering the questions, helping to guide the families if they're not sure how to do all of this, what to do. And so I think you'll see more of that too as we begin to get more staff back on contract and in the buildings. So we've had those conversations with the principals just as recently as the end of last week. So today, thank you, Ms. Johnson, and as Dr. Bryan Merrill comes forward, I just want to segue to him and his presentation that not only will he walk you through the calendar, which has been a joint effort, and we've taken a lot of feedback from the teachers as well as the leaders in developing that, but you're going to see what I'm going to term as a little bit of innovative scheduling. And I think that the time is right for us to think a little differently. in terms of providing teachers with time and also with thinking through the safety protocols that are associated with it. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Merrill.
Thank you so much. Dr. Wick, would you like a copy of the presentation? I have a copy.
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, guys, I appreciate the opportunity to come in today, and I don't think in any one given year have we had as many conversations about the calendar as we're going to have this year. That being said, we've never seen a year quite like this. Thinking back to when we proposed the calendar and where it's gone and what we're looking at. Before we get started, I just want to echo what Dr. Whitbeck said about all the conversations that we've had. I think we've really gone out in any type of constituency that we've had, whether it's parents, students, staff members, leadership, campus personnel, you name it. We've had multiple conversations with these guys. And most of the time we're just listening. There's really very few questions that are asked, but just a real opportunity for them to weigh in and express what they're thinking and what they're going through, where their concerns are, what they're excited about, all of those conversations. And they've been multiple times. And Dr. Whitbeck's allowed us to sit in on those conversations and to listen, really just to start problem solving. And as we think back to the beginning of the summer and where we sit now, she's always allowed us to kind of think out of the box, and if there's a solution that was out there, she wanted us to bring it. And I've heard y'all say that in this room as well. Countless times y'all told us if there's something out there that you need or want, and there's something that you know that we need to get, then just make it known to y'all, and we will find a way to make that happen. So we began the conversation just in some generic about the year and the calendar, and then it got more specific. And so I can't say enough about the personnel. I've shared this with Dr. Whitbeck, Donna Willett, David Reynolds, Pat Corbett, Janice Williamson, Eric Ezar, Ross Rogers, Jennifer Lemons, the high school teacher task force, Sunny Fryer, Leslie Holcamp, Debbie Richards, the principals, the counselors, the cabinet. I'm going to leave someone out, but I felt just compelled to be able to list those names because they were instrumental in the development of this, and it's not really my idea as much as it's our idea, and that's where it kind of came from. And so the purpose of the calendar revisions was based on extensive feedback from parents, students, staff, district administrators, and health officials. The proposed calendar revisions were developed through the lens of safety, cleanliness, as well as the current nature and expectations of teaching and learning in a pandemic. We'd all agree these are unique times. What's being asked of us and what we need to do is different than when it's ever been. And so when we looked at that schedule, that calendar, we really stepped back and said, what we have proposed, is it what's best, or could we do something different? And as you know, the commissioner will put out exemplars, other districts will put out exemplars. We'd see it on social media and all over the place. And so we would look at it and kind of pick and choose what exactly we thought would be best for Bryan ISD. And so that, on top of the lens of the conversations that we were having just naturally with the staff about what does the school year look like, that's kind of where the proposal today came from. So it's a couple of different layers, lenses that we looked at. All right, next slide. All right, so the proposed calendar revisions. We did consider parent and teacher input, not only in direct conversations, but also their feedback from the surveys. You'll see that the survey we shared with you was eye-opening. I don't know at the beginning of when we put that survey out that I would have been able to tell you exactly where people would be online or hybrid or in person, which is why we needed to gain their perspective. We asked teachers as well their thoughts. So not only did we have a face-to-face conversation on Zoom, if you will, but also generically they shared that. Core calendar committee met multiple times to be able to talk about the calendar and what it looked like. The feedback from campus and department administrators district-wide. It's an emphasis that it's not only campus-based, but it was department-based, and so that was a really, really big thing. And then input from health officials. We're blessed in this community to have direct access to those guys, and they are instrumental in helping us make decisions on what the calendar should look like. Right. So I think if you've not seen a copy of this, then here it is. This is the proposed calendar. If you'll get it out, I'll be happy to kind of talk a little bit about the development of it. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have and how it came about. It is a departure from what you've traditionally seen us bring you. And once again, I would say that that's due in large part to the pandemic that we find ourselves in. And so one of the things that we've added at the beginning of the calendar, just to kind of walk you through each month, is an increased staff development time. We all agree that what we've asked teachers to do this year is vastly different than what we've ever asked them to do potentially. We don't know exactly if we're going to be able to honor all of the online or in-person requests that the teachers have made, but we know that we've got some additional responsibilities that we want to be able to give teachers time to be able to address. It's unlike anything else. So we've gone in and we've added a couple of days to where we would have traditionally started the school year. And so that's simply for the campus to be able to have time to work through the procedures, the policies, the practices of when kids show up, what does it look like, what does instruction look like, what does online instruction look like. All of those things are they just need a little extra time. And so we wanted to be able to give them as much as possible. Now, you know this, y'all have been, had your hand in all of this from the beginning of these calendars, but those operational minutes are something that have really been in play here. And the operational minutes, just as a reminder, are the state of Texas says you have to operate for the following set of minutes. And if you don't operate for the following set of minutes, then they won't approve the calendar. We obviously are doing that. So we have those operational minutes in there. In addition to that, you've got CTE hours, the amount of contact hours that the kids have, which is obviously important. And then you have instructional minutes. And constantly changing was the commissioner's release of information and what he would share and how much he would share and what that directly meant for us. But the instructional minutes said we had to be open for at least 4 hours a day or we weren't paid for that day. And I can tell you we weren't going to bring a calendar where we weren't going to get paid for the day. And so obviously that's taking place. So at the beginning of August, we had some additional staff development, professional development days. We would start on Thursday, August the 20th. That is in line with what you see in Brazos Valley. It's in line with A&M. It's in line with College Station ISD. It falls in line with those places, maybe a day or two different, but for the most part, that same week. That wasn't necessarily our driving force. That was where we landed with all of the other things that we took into consideration and felt like that was the best start for our district. Now we'll get to that second full week of school, the 24th through the 28th, and you'll notice a half day there. And you'll notice the half days that are occurring pretty much every Wednesday. In some cases, they're not there if there's already a 4-day week or if it's right before a holiday. And let me explain a little bit about why we moved from the Friday. In our previous proposed calendar, you saw those professional development days there. There weren't as many. There were a few, but there weren't as many. They were moved from Friday to Wednesday. We moved them to Wednesday for a couple of purposes. Number one, we really felt like in the middle of the week, if we had time for our custodial services, for them to be able to clean the building. And so in some respects, we developed a Wednesday deep clean, where we can clean, obviously, the entire week. We're not suggesting that you won't be cleaning classrooms, but we've got a concentrated effort on that Wednesday to be able to do that. And so the teachers will be expected to be in the building. They're not leaving early. Many of the things that we do during will allow for the staff to be there. So we don't need them to leave their room or leave the building. We can just operate, but it is less kids in the building. And so we've done that because we're asking potentially them to do more with less. We're asking them to take care of not only kids in the classroom, but also kids online. Now, we know that that's not 100% the case. If we can accommodate for it, we're looking at accommodating for people that may need to go completely online, but we're still in the process of letting the principals look at that and work through with HR and school leadership whether or not that can happen. So let's say it doesn't happen, where the teacher is expected to take care of what would amount to 70% of the kids face-to-face and 30% online. That's a whole new world. And they need time to be able to do that. And as much as we possibly could, we wanted to be able to give them time back. So Dr. Woodbeck shared at the beginning of this, we looked at safety, we looked at health, we looked at not only considering our students, but also our staff, and we wanted to take care of both groups. And so that's where that Wednesday kind of came in. Not only the cleanliness for everyone involved, but also the opportunity kind of midweek for the kids to go home a little early and for us to have time for the staff to work with them within their team or take care of whatever they need to take care of. And so that's where those Wednesdays come from. And we reversed the order. I'll share with you that we did reverse the order of who gets out at what time. Last year, the elementary got out first and the secondary got out second. We did reverse that to let the high school get out first and then elementary to get out second. We did that because many families have older siblings, and if they're home waiting on their siblings to get there, they have built-in childcare, or they've got a neighbor, or they've got a cousin, or they've got a friend, they've got anyone they could potentially use. And so if we're going to ask the family, not only for good reasons, this direct benefits to them, but also for our staff, we wanted to try to provide them as much help as we possibly could. And we felt like this was the way to be able to do that. And so the calendar just kind of becomes predictable after that if you see it. You know, it's mostly the Wednesdays. If you're wondering why it's a Friday, it's probably backs up to a major holiday. And then the Wednesdays that we don't have it, that's state testing. And we weren't able to work that in because of testing. And you can't do it after or before. It really doesn't fit. And so we weren't able to do that. And so there is a method to the madness. It's not complete chaos. We felt like that the Wednesday made the most sense as opposed to a Friday. And so we just continued that whole process. Now, there's some things that changed. If you want to go to the next slide, Matthew. So what's different? The first day of school obviously is different. It's August the 20th instead of what was proposed. There's more staff development days before the start of school. I've shared that. The number of early dismissals and day of the week for most early dismissals has changed to Wednesday instead of Friday. And we released high school students first on early dismissal days, and that's purely for childcare. If they need it, they have it. And we can allow them to go home and maybe be at home and get a kid off the bus if they need it. We also felt like adjusting the dismissal time for the elementaries. If it wasn't quite as big, it was maybe a little smaller, we could still give the teachers time that they needed, but it wasn't dramatically affecting when they got home. So what I'll show you is it's only an hour difference. And an hour may not seem like much, but believe it or not, it really is to a teacher to know on Wednesday I get an additional hour on top of what I have after school. So from a parent's perspective, and I'm an elementary parent, I've got 3 kids in the district, what you'll find is that the elementaries will be releasing just an hour early, and the high schools will be releasing before then. So they can get out a little earlier because they're allowed to maybe be at the home. Parents feel a little more comfortable with that than they would the elementary kids. So the high school will release at 1, and the elementaries would release around 2 o'clock. So those are the proposed calendar revisions. We start and stop the same hours of the school day. We've not adjusted that. We felt like that was really important for our transportation to be able to set their routes and be able to get kids where they needed to. So that hasn't changed. The major holidays and breaks that were voted on initially in the proposed calendar, we've kept those the same. And then obviously the graduation, Lord willing, we'd be able to keep that the same. You wouldn't have to adjust it. And so those are kind of what we walked into, knowing that that was sort of what the district wanted. They've already weighed in on it. The parents did, and we wanted to try to keep it as consistent as possible. So some of you may have asked, like, what are we doing and what would be an option? One of the things that we're discussing is a block schedule. And I want to talk just quickly about that and answer any questions. One of the things that when we started talking to the teachers, we started talking to the leaders, they specifically at the secondary level, there's just a lot of transition. It's an 8-period day. We're committed to an 8-period day. We believe in an 8-period day. We're not backing off of that. In a normal non-pandemic year, we'd be rolling out the 8-period day. Unfortunately, the pandemic changes things, and it forces us to look at things a little bit differently. And so many of y'all are familiar with the block, you remember a block, and you've seen variations of it. But in essence, what it amounts to is you just don't meet with the same number of classes every day. The classes that you do meet with are a little bit longer. And so if you think of us in an 8-period day, we would be meeting with 4 classes in a day. And what that does is it cuts down on the transitions. So there's less kids in the hallways transitioning every period. There's more time in the class, so it gives teachers the opportunity to not only work with their kids in face-to-face, but if they need to, they've got some opportunity to do that online because there's a longer period. 45 minutes is a short time frame. In a normal setting, it's adequate. It's more than enough. But in a pandemic, it becomes difficult. And that was one of the concerns that they said. There's not as many kids in a classroom. So if I'm only going 3 classes in a given day, that's a lot less than 6 or 7. And so I don't have the same number of kids kind of floating in and out the class and worry about exposure. So we've limited that. It's flexible time during the day. It gives us some different opportunities to do different things. And then what it also does is allow us to do a Wednesday, a modified day, early dismissal day, where we would do that deep clean. So those are all important things. One last thing I would add is it does also give us time to add in transitions. So for example, normally there's a 6-minute passing period between Bryan High or Rudder. We're going to add 2 minutes onto that, bring all of the staff out, and we're going to have one-way hallways. Whereas before you've got them going back and forth, so now we're going to have one-way hallways. We couldn't do that if we had a shorter transition class time. And if right now sitting at the 45 minutes, we would go below that 45 minutes if we wanted to do that. And we do feel like that's an important thing to do. Hopefully the pandemic will continue to trend in the right direction, and maybe more students will come back to school. We want to be able to bring those kids in. And so if we start with a 70 and a 30, we anticipate hopefully that going in the right direction. And if we do so, then that would give us the opportunity to increase the number of students in the building without maybe changing our practices or our procedures. And so that hybrid or the block schedule would give us that time to be able to do that. So I wanted to stop here and answer any questions you have. I know I flew through and there's a lot of information thrown at you. I'm happy to answer anything that you have, and we'll continue through the presentation if you don't have anything.
Bryan, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I know particularly at the high school with activities, between the early release and time for activities or early release and kids not having a ride,
Sure.
what, which, you know, I know, I mean, that happens.
Yes, ma'am.
So is it a campus decision what they're going to do with those students?
So let's just take Wednesday, for example. Obviously, the buses are running. I mean, they're picking up, they're dropping off. And then roughly at 1 o'clock, the kids at the secondary level, they're allowed to go home, right? And we know that some of the coaches and sponsors, whether they be academic or athletic, may want to continue. And so we've talked about kind of like happens at the end of the day anyway. So normally our practice is that if they end at 6 o'clock, they're finding rides home. We've talked about if the need arrives, that we do have obviously bus drivers that we could maybe look at. We haven't talked about running a late bus, but if we needed to, we could do that on an as-needed basis. So if we saw kids needed to stay, or if an activity wanted to continue to practice, they couldn't get a ride home, we could do the white fleet, we could do the buses, we could find a way to make that work for kids.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, but, I mean, I'm just thinking of the past. So is there a center place like a gym or something? Because if I'm a parent, this is what I want to know. You know, if I can't pick my child up until a certain time, or their
Sure.
band or whatever doesn't start, the kids I know are not just going to run, you know,
So
go to the
most-
stores.
Yes, ma'am. Most of the kids will go home on the bus, or their parents will pick them up. If their parents can't pick them up, then they would normally either find a ride with the kids that drove, or they would get on the bus. And it would be a much smaller group of kids that would be basically required by their sponsor to stay after school. Everyone, like would normally happen in an early release, would be expected to leave the building or to go home. And so, you know, in a pandemic, you want to be very careful bringing groups of kids together. They would obviously need to be with their coach or with their sponsor, and that has been discussed. So I can tell you with Coach Rogers, Coach Izar, it's been discussed with Pat Corbett, like all of those guys, we've talked through what that would look like if indeed they wanted to have extra time on the Wednesday to be able to meet with their group. And we've said that is a possibility. You know, we recognize that this is an abnormal year and we don't want to leave anything off the table. And those individuals, those coaches and sponsors are used to balancing a bunch of things. They're used to handling all kinds of things. And so even if that meant that they continued practice, like let's say 1:30, and they went for their UIL allotted time, and then they would come back in the building and finish whatever professional development or staff development they had is what we go up.
You may have already addressed this and I just missed it, but I know that some kids, especially at the secondary level, are not going to say anything. They don't have a ride. And so I hope that that's in place where basically whatever class they're in, the last class, somebody asks each child, "All right, do you have a way home? Are you somebody picking you up? What's your situation?" But I just know that that's a tendency for some kids. They're just maybe it's embarrassment or whatever, but
Right.
they don't really want to say they had no one to pick them up.
Yes, sir. You're exactly right. So one of the thoughts on starting on a Thursday, it gives us 4 days before that Wednesday happens, and it allows us to have those conversations ahead of time. Instead of starting on a Monday and all of a sudden we're rolling with just a brand new start of school, and then by Wednesday we're trying to figure it out. It's a little bit of an adjustment. So if we start on a Thursday, Friday, and then we get Monday, Tuesday, it's just an opportunity for them to have those conversations a little bit more than they would have if we started it, 3 days into school. So that was another reason why we started it. But Mr. Stazzy, you're exactly right. If we could get every kid just to tell us what they needed, we'd be in great shape. They unfortunately won't. So you have to see and speak for them. So I can tell you, and I just speak to one school in particular, we did notice that. Somebody had left off that I need to say, Warren. over in transportation. I didn't mention his name. That guy, I can't tell you enough. I mean, it's like a phone call. And I mean, within a minute, he's like, oh yeah, we can do that. And I'm like, did that really just happen? Like, that's how long the conversation was. And so, you know, Warren, I've called him a bunch of times on things and like, hey, we need to get a white fleet over. We got some kids that aren't able to make it or aren't able to get home. And it's been, I mean, if he can do it, it gets done. And so I know transportation was a concern here in years past. I've heard stories. I wasn't here for that. I'm just telling you that Warren and Julie and her department, I mean, it's literally a phone call. So when we started talking about the early releases, I was like, Warren, I want to flip them. And here's why. I want the high school kids to be home to help with getting kids off the buses. Is that going to be a problem? And he was like, you just give me an hour and we'll get it done. I just need an hour from when the high school's dismissed to when the elementary is dismissed, and we'll make it work. And so that's when we started kind of fiddling with it to get the number of operational minutes we needed. You know, I student taught here. I think I've shared that with you. I student taught at Bryan High. So my first experience in public ed was here. And, you know, I lived off Barrett Street for college and was right down the road from Bryan High. And my teacher, you know, a lady that really taught me how to live and to do school was Colleen Holmes. And she's who I student taught under. She didn't look a day older than when I had her as a teacher. If you know her, that's a true statement. And as we started thinking about this in the Colleen homes in our building, I wanted to be able to look them in the eye and tell them, like, we seriously considered what we were doing. We looked at the bell schedule, we looked at the calendar, and I wanted to be able to tell them why we made the decisions that we did and why we didn't make the decisions that we did. And if work for us or for anyone additional was really a reason, I can tell you that wasn't shared in Bryan ISD. And this is more work. I listed some names because the work hasn't even begun for some of these guys. Like our core counselors, like this is going to be an adjustment for them. I can tell you the way Donna Willetts led into this and the way that she'll lead her counselors through this is it's going to happen. If this is what's best for our team, then this is what we're absolutely going to do, even though, and she'll say it's going to be more work, and here's how it's going to be more work. It's not an obstacle that would prevent us from doing it. And so when I think about Colleen, you know, she's shown up. I mean, you know that. She was at every graduation. I was there, she was there. She didn't miss one. It didn't matter if it was Bryan High, if it was MC Harris. It didn't matter who. She was going to be there with a smile on her face, and she was going to do whatever I asked her to do. If it was interact with the public, if it was stand on the back knoll, it didn't matter. But I wanted to be able to make sure that I looked at her and I said, hey, we've taken your help into consideration. We're doing everything possible to make sure that you have a good year, a healthy year, and then so do our students. And so that's really what we wanted to be able to do. And that's where we kind of landed on this calendar.
Well, you said what I was worried about, which was our counselors. I know anytime you go from a 7 or 8 period day to a block schedule, it's monumental to redo those master schedules. So I appreciate that they're willing to, and I really do appreciate the work of so many folks to be innovative in a time where, you know, it'd be easier just to do what we've done before, but that probably isn't the best answer.
No. So one of the reasons we landed on a block was simply because it's divided by 2, right? So it's 8 divided by 2, and it's less hardship on our counselors as opposed to going to something different. So a modified block or a 7 period day or any of those, all of a sudden we're adjusting everything. Like we're literally shifting it all, and we're having to go back to, I don't know, I mean, we're creating it from the ground up. Now, I'm not suggesting it's easy. It's exactly what you said. It's going to be a lot. Our special ed department, I mean, I've talked with them twice. They're going to have to go back and do art amendments, and they've not flinched. They want to understand it, and they ask great questions, but they've not flinched. Dr. Barr and her team, who's leading special ed, has really said, if this is what's best, and they've been a part of these conversations. So, you know, it wasn't as if one person really decided this. It was a bunch of thoughts that kind of got put together, and then we just kept looking at what's best for our teachers, what's best for our students, and is it best just to run an 8 period day? And as we started answering those questions, the boxes just didn't check. And we could come up with something that was a little different, it was a little innovative, but we felt like on paper, I could look Colleen, we could look the teachers in the eyes, we could look the parents in the eyes, and we could say, like, this is the reason that we did this. We're in this together. We're, you know, my kids are going to school. Like, I mean, I got 3 of them that are showing up. I got one at the high school, one at the middle school, and one at the intermediate. And so they're everywhere. And I mean, so not only am I walking in the buildings, but I'm also seeing my kids there. And I want to make sure that they're ready. And I can tell you, you know, everybody's got to make their own personal decision, but for the Merrills, we're sending them back to school. I know that it's second to none for me. And my kids and what they need. And so, we know that there'll be some challenges with that, but we're ready to face it. But I wanted to be able to look my wife in the eye and tell her that we did everything possible to be able to build a schedule that was conducive to their health. Who's a counselor in the district.
And just one other follow-up, what we've talked about with the block schedule, that's just for middle and high school? Okay.
And it's just for this year.
Right.
So, we did not engage in the conversations really, is this instructionally the best plan in a non-pandemic year? That wasn't the conversation. So I fully anticipate we're out of this in a year, or hopefully sooner, and we're back to our normal 8-period day. We're not sitting in this because there's a lot of drawbacks, right? You don't see your kids but a couple times a week. So we have to learn to teach in that, and not everybody is accustomed to that as they are in a block. And so there's a lot of things our curriculum instruction people have to adjust to be able to make sure that we're effective. And so this is like a 1-year proposal, where this isn't a permanent Bryan ISD move.
Dr. Merrill, the names that you were able to talk about that were on your committee to decide all this, there's like 5,000 years of education experience with all those people together.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I, know most of them and trust them so much. And you just said something that I think reflects all of us as a board and administration in Bryan ISD. The decisions we're making as an administrative part of the district, we're treating parents just like we would want to be treated as parents of kids in this district. And we're trying to do our best for students as we would want our own children, thought about and dealt with and prepared for. And so we may make mistakes, but it's not going to be because our heart and professional decision-making wasn't, it was in the right place.
Yes, ma'am. I agree 100%. It were 5,000 hours, and it was fun watching and talking to them and seeing how quickly they can problem solve and even start to suggest things. I got texts and emails after, I got one, a young lady you'll know well, about 10 o'clock at night when it was still on her mind, and she was thinking about it, and she wanted me to know what she had thought about and sent it to me. And Rose Greg, you've got these people that are so embedded and entrenched in this district that they're going to show up, and I just want them. And I can tell you that, I don't know exactly what this will look like, so we're not talking specifically about this, but it'll be something similar potentially to what we're looking at. That was the reason that part of we changed the calendar. If we're going to change the calendar, what does that look like for the bell schedule? And so it was like one big conversation. But we didn't leave divided. I'll say that. When we left, there was consensus among the teachers about this is what needs to happen. And so, we're still working out the nuances to try to get it as perfect as we possibly can. And we know it won't be perfect, but as perfect as we possibly can. But there was consensus with that phone call. And there was 40 something people on there, and I made them vote. So I asked a series of questions at the end that it was you need to vote. So you've been silent, but at the end of this, and this is a safe place, it's kind of, we're not sharing it out. And so everyone voted kind of deal. So, Ms. Shevin.
So Ron, I know we're releasing the high school first in hopes that they'll be home with the younger kids.
Yes, ma'am.
But then I have to wonder, do we have something in place for the elementary kids that are there, that don't ride the bus, that mom's still at work, and dad's at work, and so.
Yeah, we do. That's a great.
We're gonna take care of it.
Yeah. How long have you been teaching? Because you clearly know that it's a voice concern by our principals. That is a change. So, the first couple will be probably more rough than anything else at the end of the year. We will have a late bus. We will have, obviously, the white fleet, and those are just solutions that we'll have to deploy. And so we know that even though we're creating a little bit of, challenges maybe, or a little bit change to the routine, the hour that we get with our teaching staff is really invaluable. And so, for example, it might be that paraprofessionals watch them. It might be that we move them over to the cafeteria. We do something different with those kids that don't get picked up immediately on time. But we do have, like I said, one is a phone call away, and they know how to use it.
We also have Alphabet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Let me ask this question a little bit more directly.
Yeah.
There are existing programs in place. Will those programs be?
So Alphabet has said they'll pick up whenever we start, and then they'll pick up whenever we stop at the day. It's a great question. Thank you, Mark.
So it's now possible that a parent may not need Alphabet or want it all during the normal course of the week, but just on that Wednesday, they may, because maybe they're a car rider and they need that full extra hour, then they could just have for a small fee that extra childcare. So Alphabet was very cooperative from what I'm told by staff who actually spoke with them. Very, very cooperative.
Yes.
This may not be under your jurisdiction, but I'll ask it and then you can tell me if not. We're all seeing what's going on in the real world, and you have places like Walmart where people are being assaulted because they weren't going to let them in without a mask. And so Walmart's policy, I think, currently is you have to wear a mask, but if you don't, we'll serve you anyway. So I know that that's a poor analogy to our schools, maybe, but has that been thought through about what we're going to do with kids? Basically, they've got the mask down here. And, you know, they're just saying, no, they just won't pull it up. And because I'm worried about the other kids because I don't, you know, if we got a kid that's not complying, we can say, well, that's his problem, but of course he becomes a spreader, right? Because he's not wearing a mask. So has that been thought through? We got, is it going to be, are going to be consequences, and I know it's going to be one more headache if it's widespread. I hope all our students are going to cooperate, and it's going to be a good thing. And I think to a large extent that will be true. But as we know from, I think one incident in graduation, once something starts, it sort of snowballs. I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about.
I do.
One of our graduations.
I do.
So, anyway, can you address that a little bit?
I can. So absolutely, we've had those conversations. So we've convened a discipline committee. The teachers have asked it. That's been another, not only has it led to this conversation, but it's also led to adjustments to the code of conduct. And, you know, Ruthie mentioned before we got here that she pulled the code of conduct from 95, and it was like this, and we've had to probably add, you know, that much just to deal with PPE and what it's going to look like. And so we've got a discipline committee together that's made of leadership and teachers that have met with myself and Ms. Goodman and got some proposed consequences that we've never had to look at before. And so not only has other districts put it out, but also various organizations to share with us what you know, the appropriate consequences can be. Because normally the natural consequence would fall on the kid, right? So now it's not. So if I take my mask off and I do something and I'm contagious, now the natural consequence, unfortunately, is falling. I'm a spreader, as you shared. So it's beyond. And there has to be an appropriateness to those consequences and to the requirement that we've said. If you're going to come to school, it's going to look the following way. It is what it is. You cannot like it. I cannot like it, but we're going to do it. And so that's just the reality of what's going to have to take place the minute they get there till the minute they leave. This is what's expected. And so, you know, when we thought about that, even just to take it back to this conversation, you wanted time to be able to address those things. Because in the routine of a 45-minute class or an 8-period day, it's just rolling, and you're just seeing kids like this. You're like, mask. I mean, and so if you slow it down, or if you can stagger it, or if you've got one-way hallways, it's easier to be able to police those types of things, and they can see us doing it as opposed to I've just got a bunch of kids flowing back and forth. I'm not suggesting that we're not going to have it. We're going to have it. We have to be prepared for it. We never be shocked when a kid comes to school and acts like a kid, right? I mean, they're going to be 15, 16-year-olds. They're going to behave like that. They're going to understand the gravity of the moment because of the nature of the time in which we live, but they're going to miss some of those too. And we have to not be surprised. We have to be ready for it. And those conversations have taken place. So we're not ready to stamp it yet, but we had a conversation today with Cabinet about it. And we had one before last week with the people that I shared to be able to start writing those procedures down so that they're clear and they're consistent.
I think as we go forward, additionally, and we're looking at how can parents help? What are the things that parents can do? I know I answered that question last week on a media interview. You know, there's lots of things parents can do. Go ahead and get your immunizations, get your school supplies, whether you're coming in or you're working at home, all these things. And I think that the mask and getting your child comfortable masks that they can also practice while you're going out in the community, but wearing the same things that they're accustomed to, so they're not learning it for the first time on the first day. And the younger the child, the more important that is. And what style of mask? Is it the type that goes around your neck and pops up and pops down, so the teacher can just say, pull it up a little bit, or that kind of thing? Or is it the kind that goes behind the ear? What's going to be best for your child? I think those are ways that parents can help us now in preparing for smoother transitions.
So I was at Bryan High, dropped my son off for workouts, and they didn't know I was there. I was in the hallway. I was just hanging out, and I was listening. And so, the kids are going to take it as seriously as we take it. Honestly, if we show that it's important, and I wear my mask, and Mr. Boobin wears his mask, and the coaches wear their mask, and then when I pull it off, they correct it, well, then it's going to send a clear message that this is important. Coach did not know I was there. I've told Janice they didn't know. He stopped the middle of workouts. He brought them like in an appropriate distance, and he was telling them what they needed to do with their mask, and they needed to put it back on. If they didn't have it on, they weren't being a team player, and what team players look like in Bryan ISD and what it means. And so, that was an unsolicited, did not know it, just immediately responded to the moment. And so my prayer is that everyone would respond that way, that we all have that thing, that the kids would take it that seriously, but the staff members are going to have to be out. And so the minute that we add 2 minutes to the transition period, well, we've added 2 minutes. And y'all know that the minute you do that, you've introduced a little more chaos. So we've already said to the principals, you're going to have to bring the staff out. They're going to have to get out of their rooms. And we've slowed the day down so they can do that. The minute the bell rings, they need to step out, they need to have their mask on, and they need to be policing and making sure that everyone's directing what to do. And if we all do that, well, we outnumber them, right, in so many respects. And so we can get them to comply a lot better than we would if it was just, if I worry about Colleen Holmes, for example, having to do a lab, clean our equipment, get out in the hall, start the next class, and that happens 7 times. Like that's just difficult. And we want to still be able to do labs. We still need to clean equipment, but I'm going to have to ask her, do that with in person, do that online, and step out in the halls, because now we've added a whole new layer. It's not just about a sagging pair of pants or a belt not being on, or the inappropriate shirt. Like that's bad enough, and we need to address it, and we need to continue to address it. But this is people's health, and so we need to be as close to 100% as we possibly can with this.
Earlier, first of all, I want to say that there are a whole lot of things that were issues before that aren't solution. We were talking about Wednesdays and special classes and so on. Has any thought been given to moving up what would normally happen after class to during that time? First part of September, maybe that if they're outside of it. And then maybe we could run limited bus service.
So you're saying flip it?
Only, no. On Wednesdays, okay. Everybody gets out, but the people who would have been coming back to practice normally or to rehearsal.
Yeah. So go ahead. Did you say something, Rebecca?
No, I think that's what we are doing. That's what we.
So they are, the coaches, the directors, and so on are thinking about moving things up.
Yes, sir, they are. We want to give them permission to do that.
And they won't just hang out.
No.
Waiting for 3:30 for a practice.
They would begin it sooner. The coaches would begin practice sooner, and then they would do whatever's required of them after that. And that's what the coaches are used to doing, that type of schedule. So,
okay.
Yeah. We talked with Mr. Corbett as well about, our choir program here is, literally my first, Dr. Webeck invited me to, I guess it wasn't convocation, it was the end of the year's awards celebration. And I brought my boys. Because they were moving and they didn't know where they were coming. And so I was like, they need to come see, we need to see culturally what's happening. And y'all know this because you've been here, but the choir is like ridiculous. They're just, my boys just looked at me and they're like, oh my God, what in the world is happening? And it was just we had never heard, high school kids. So Pat Corbett, and you can believe he's going to be looking for time for his teams to still be able to meet and get things accomplished and spread the room out and do all of what's required of them. So we've talked with them as well.
Okay, this will be the last thing. What I like, the thoughts about the 6 days of professional development, that gives our teachers enough time to grasp what's expected, go home, sleep on it, and then realize, okay, this can work. Okay, they really prepared us for this. And because if we just had a couple of days before school started, it would be so tough for teachers to change their, mindset. And so I really like that there's plenty of time because, there's so many changes, but it gives them time to digest.
We've been listening to this. I couldn't agree more. We've been listening to this all summer. And some of our teachers, the first time, they just need chances to digest it as well. So they hear it, they need to see it, they come back. It just needs to, it has to really sink in. The fear of the unknown is a real thing, and we want to try to make sure that it's known so that fear is taken out.
So I have been leaning on the side of delay. I don't think it's going to come back. I don't feel comfortable making decisions about sending your kids back when I don't feel comfortable about putting my own kids at risk. And I don't sleep well and I read things because I'm really, really concerned that when I vote to say we're coming back, that we're going to lose someone. We already, we have teachers that already have it. They had police. We had a young mom that we just lost this weekend. She was 37. Her kids are going to get voted, and that is weighing very, very heavily. So with that, I say I appreciate the work that has been done, and I feel that we have put you and your team in an unimaginable, awful, stressful, no-win situation, and that we're going to have to make sure that we each acknowledge that it's not your fault that this goes back.
Right.
And it's not on us. That we are in positions to where we're having to make decisions about people's lives with very limited data and with information that changes every day. And this, I believe, is the least awful. And so out of great respect to you, I will be in support of what you have presented with the acknowledgement that we're doing the best we can with very good intentions, and we don't want to lose anyone,
right,
but they haven't given us that choice.
No.
And without that choice, this is the least awful, and you and I don't get to hold responsibility for that. These decisions were made above me.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Mr. Wayne, we feel the very same way.
We do.
And we lose sleep over the exact same reasons. As a matter of fact, I think of everything, it's, if we delay, or even if we go online for a few weeks, will the situation be any different? I literally proposed that question to an entire Zoom of every leader, assistant principal, and higher. And the reality of that is most likely not going to be really any different in a few weeks. At least at the moment in Brazos Valley, we are seeing a decline in active cases. And so, and we've had many conversations with Dr. Sullivan. I think I spoke to him, I've probably spoken to him 10 times in the last couple of weeks. So we are very much, but we also know that we don't have control. It's a virus. We don't have control. So we're going to set it up the very best we can. Our families have that online option if they're not comfortable. It's our staff that we know that's the reality that we're in. But I appreciate your comments because I think you pretty much echoed, would you not say 100%. Everything that we've talked about over and over again, that I've had multiple conversations with my husband about how I agonize over this, and that we really don't have a perfect path. There is no perfect path. So at least we can say, this is our path, and we'll rally behind it, and we will continue to monitor and adjust as we need to and as new issues arise.
I agree 100%.
I did want to, on a more positive note, mention that years ago when I was a principal in Katy ISD, and the cabinet knows this, I proposed, I was opening a brand new high school, and I proposed an early release Wednesday for the purpose of being able to have teachers plan and to be organized and to better prepare everything. And I didn't get to have it because I think there was some fear that if my high school got to try it, then everybody else would be jealous. So we didn't get it. But that goes back a ways. And I will tell you that I think there's power in having a consistent time every week that teachers know they have, even not in a pandemic. So who knows where this will lead us in terms of maybe better instruction and better practices for the future as we dip our toe in it.
I know we said all along that things are going to be different. They have to be. And I know even dealing with some professors up at A&M this week, or last week, we're struggling with some of the new room dynamics, and they forgot that some of those components that they have to stay in the front. They can't be as out and about amongst the students as they could have been last fall. And so I think when we talk about all the different situations, and there's so much going on, there's so much that will be going on with the individual teachers within their classroom and the social distancing there. And I think it's so far beyond the calendar. I think there's a great number of precautions that are being taken that we've seen bits and pieces of. There are a few things that I do think are probably a little bit more important and a little bit more strategic, and I'm glad that y'all got to the point specifically with the block scheduling, because that does minimize the movement of students and being in different groups throughout the day. And I thought that was going to be very important when we went back. The one thing that I would ask for, and I know it's a double-edged sword, because as you mentioned, if you add 2 minutes to a passing period, you add 2 minutes to a passing period. But at the same time, I do think at least during the transition, there needs to be some leniency on the part of the teachers and the principals. Really, if you're not here right at 6 minutes, there needs to, we don't need to be afraid to provide some leniency during the time of the overall transition, because everybody's going to be getting used to the new one-way hallways. And we don't know what next week's going to look like at any given moment. So I do, but I do think that this is a good point at which to start from. But I just want to clarify, I think talking about things can change. We're going to make a commitment to the block schedule for a year. We're not going to come back at the end of the semester and go, oh, everything's going great, so we're going to switch back to an 8 and throw that wrinkle.
So, if that were the case, then I can't even imagine what this world would look like in our current state. It would be a beautiful thing to be able to consider it.
I agree, but I just want to reassure those teachers that are adjusting to a block schedule that we're not going to change.
I hope. We all dream, but realistically, I think that's a long shot. So I do think that, I can't put 100%, but if this somehow just disappeared and it went back to normal, that we would at least consider it. But there would have to be so many factors that fell into place for that to take place. So it is a commitment to their health. So things would have to change.
Other than Ms. Dwayne's very well stated concerns, I guess my next concern is the workload that we're imposing on the teachers, especially considering, and you mentioned it, that they'll have students in class, students out of class. We'll have teachers who are online for their own health reasons.
Right.
And, I teach online in class, and they're different games, and it's not a symbiotic relationship between the two classes. You're teaching the same material.
They're different.
The time commitment for an online class is very different from face-to-face.
We all agree, absolutely. And so the answer to that is, number one, the professional development at the beginning, being able to work with them to tell them what the assignment is, what's expected, the time to be able to develop both of those, because it is different. And then a committed, and this is what we're doing today, a committed time that's an asset, right? That's a commodity. That's something we can give our teachers if we can do that. And so this is time, not only we're attempting to give our secondary teachers 2 conference periods. We're attempting to. So that would be a conference on a Monday and a conference on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday, what we've already discussed. We're not 100% positive we can do that, but that's what we're committing to, so that our teachers have a committed time on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday to be able to anchor in and take care of exactly what you said, Dr. Holmberg. So, I mean, I didn't say that. I'm being recorded, and so I know that, and I'm not promising it, but I can tell you that Donna Willett and her team, that is a emphasis that we are pushing. We want to be able to give as much conference. We want an at-home learning period and a conference period is what we would like. And Dr. Whitbeck has challenged us to be able to find that for our staff. And so we're attempting to do that as in many cases as we possibly can for the reasons that you mentioned. And where it's not appropriate, if there's an completely online component, maybe that would adjust for the teachers back in the building. But where appropriate, we're trying to do that. And we do know that if we could build in the schedule some time where that Wednesday is a little bit more, or I'm not having to transition to 7 periods a day, I've only got 4. My mind can then go, I've got this started. What do I do online? I can go back and forth, and I've got more time to do that, as opposed to a teacher that might have 2 or 3 preps and it's just rolling. That can be overwhelming pretty quick. And so if we could just slow it down, just slow the day down and give teachers more time to where they're not having to transition from one class to the next, because we're adding in exactly what you described.
So let me give you an example, because to explain how much detail we've looked at in terms of trying to come up with a plan, that in terms of the detail beyond, the calendar. For example, when teachers respond, I would prefer to teach virtual. I would prefer to teach face-to-face. I'm willing to do, teach on the roof if that's what you need me. I'll do anything. We had 72% of our teachers respond that they would do anything we needed, whichever way we needed it. We had 28% say they would prefer virtual. So we've asked the principals to have conversations with those 28% and find out how serious is that? Is that because you have a health concern, because your spouse does, or something of that nature? Or is this just more of, I'm just kind of scared of it, and I need to know more about the safety precautions? And honestly, according to our principals meeting last week, it was a combination of that. And so those with serious health issues can go through our Human Resources Department. There's CARES Act, does have some provisions, but through our HR, they're looking at that. But let me give you, when I first started this, my thought was, we'll take everybody who wants online, we'll make them an online teacher, and then everybody who is willing to do face-to-face, we'll make them a face-to-face teacher. But here's what happens when you actually start looking at that in reality. So I want you to I'll take an easy math. This is the same scenario I used with the teacher task force and got their input. 100 children in a grade level. So we could pick any grade level, let's say 3rd grade. And if there was 100 children at that school in 3rd grade, we would give them 5 teachers. Okay, because mathematically they would be over 22-1 if we only gave them 4. So we would give them 5. If all 5 teachers came in, they would have 20 children each. But let's say 2 of those teachers wanted to teach online only, and we said yes. Then they would have their 20, and they would work with them online, and that would be 40 kids online. That would leave 60 children for the other 3 teachers. So now the 3 teachers in the classroom have 20 children, which normally is great. But when they're trying to social distance and they're looking at their safety, it's not as safe. If you take the same 100 children and you take the 5 employees and you spread it out, then each teacher has 12 bodies in the room that they can spread out more. This is just in a perfect math situation. We know that's not going to be the way it is. And then you would have 8 that you would work with online. Now, the next piece to this, remember that the state is requiring that parents have an option at a given point, which we've decided is a grading period, to change their mind. So now let's say things are looking better, and it's the 2nd or it's the 3rd 6 weeks, and some of those children want to come back. If they have the teacher only online, and they've learned, you know, Miss Whitbeck is my online teacher, but now I want to go back, guess what's just happened? We've now overcrowded the classroom. The classroom teacher there would be over 22-to-1, and the social distancing becomes even less possible. So when you really get down to the pragmatics of it, what we think is a perfect scenario doesn't end up really being one. And so I want you to know that I could give you the same type of scenario at high school. I could give you the same type of scenario. We have thought through this. And right now, as you heard today, about 50-50. So that same scenario I just gave you would really put about 10 kids in the room, okay, and about 10 online. And so we know we've got to help our teachers, and we've also got to use our support people like our instructional coaches to help with those lessons and to help with some of those things. So I know that was very simplistic and it was a mathematically perfect scenario, which it never is. But I think that just shows that while we wish that it could be perfect to honor every single person, I don't know that we could do it safely.
I'm glad you shared that example because I on social media, I've seen people post just exactly that. Why don't we just let the people do what they want to do for the kids who are making those choices? And we have the same thing at A&M. The kids have all the options. They can do online only, they can do face-to-face, and if they choose face-to-face, then they can choose to do remote if they suddenly change their mind. They can go back and forth. So it makes staffing such an issue. And I echo that concern about, burden on our staff and teachers. But I'm seeing it everywhere. I'm seeing it at the university, I'm seeing it in public schools. It's just sort of the nature of the beast at this point. So I just pray our people are well equipped and supported to do those roles well.
I agree.
A moment ago, you mentioned that how thoroughly you thought through this. One thing that's pretty obvious is how thoroughly you thought through all this, because I don't think I've heard a question you hadn't already discussed and had at least a proposition in terms of a solution for if not a perfect solution.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We've been principals. We've been teachers, and so we can see how it shakes out. And
that's part of where this exercise came from. I was in a car traveling up to my family farm in Monkstown, Texas, and so I was by myself, and I turned the radio off, and I thought, if I was high school principal, what would I want? And just kind of sat in that for a while and thought about it. And it was after having talked to a bunch of the teachers and everyone. And so some of the ideas that you hear today came out, and then it was like thrown out, and then everybody just started adding in. And so my portion is very small, and then everyone's contribution became very large. It took us a long time to get there. We spent a lot of time talking about it and trying to figure it out. And then it was phone call. I've gotten to work kind of with a graduation. You get to work with people you didn't get to normally work with, and it was really delightful, to be completely honest. And through this conversation, each one of the individuals that I named, I mean, David Reynolds, every time I called, it was like, hey, what do you need now? I mean, it was like, you could hear him on the other end of the phone call. What you got now? And I'm like, well, David, I need you to look at this period. And then I would call Sunday Friday. I would call someone, and I could tell in their voice they weren't frustrated with me ever. And that's remarkable, to be completely honest with you, that at no point, because honestly, these were phone calls on Friday night and Saturday because we would figure out, oh my gosh, well, we hadn't thought of this. And so I would call David, and he'd be like, well, it's got to be this. And then he would call someone, and we'd get another answer, and we would just start bouncing it back and forth. But I never heard it in their voice. And so I just truly, truly, truly appreciate it, because it would have been easy to be frustrated.
And the last thing I'll make a comment on the scenario that I gave you, and this is where you have to get down to school by school. And the principal has got to look at their own people and where they work. Are they a grade level teacher? Do they teach something that nobody else teaches? And that can happen at all levels. And do they have someone that through the human resources department is considered to be so at risk that they need to be an online teacher? So maybe in that same scenario, maybe the online teachers don't just get 20, maybe in that grade level, they get more kids. because they're doing it online. So there's a lot of different ways to try to solve the problem and make things work to the best that we can. So I just want you to know that nothing is locked in, but that idea, and that Dr. Harlan said that we all first thought, oh, we'll just give everybody what they want. It doesn't work beautifully like you might think.
So with a lot of respect, I move approval of the revised district calendar as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Mrs. Dwayne, a second by Dr. Harlan. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you. And with that, we will move down to, I'm assuming, a couple of agenda items that kind of follow the same trend, but for collegiate high school.
Mrs. Richardson. How are y'all doing?
Good, how are you?
Okay, so as usual, Bryan Collegiate needs to do things a little bit differently. So I'm always a follow-up back. Here's the difference. So there's two things. The first one to talk about is the hybrid waiver. And like Dr. Whitbeck said in the beginning of the meeting is that there's several different definitions of hybrid as this has evolved. And so in looking at how to best serve collegiate, Mr. Roberts came up with an initial plan of changing their schedule a little bit to free up some time for teachers to work online. And then some new rules came out, and then that was closed out for us. However, where they closed the door, they did open a window, and they gave us the ability to have this waiver. And what this does is it gives you the ability to say, here's a day when we are not going to have face-to-face instruction at all on our campus. And so what Collegiate is asking for is on Fridays, which was already their day that was a little bit shorter, if they can move to online, all kids online on Fridays. And it does a couple things. One, it does free up teachers to work with all of their online students on that particular day. And it also, though, it eases up the problem of that's the day that most kids are on campus, and so it would be most crowded in that building. And so it takes care of that problem as well of having too many kids too close. And the first part is getting the board approval for the waiver. Questions on that?
So just one question, are y'all gonna do the Wednesday early release?
No.
No.
No,
Okay,
with
so this is
they've been on a block schedule.
Right.
And blend classes, they cannot do an early release.
I see. I move approval of the Bryan Collegiate High School campus hybrid instruction waiver as presented.
A motion by Dr. Harlan, a second by Mrs. Dwayne. All in favor?
I have a practical question. I know you just said, okay, you're not, but don't some of your kids ride with the regular buses, or that doesn't happen?
No, Bryan Collegiate doesn't have buses.
Okay.
Right, do I just go next? All right, the next item is, of course, our calendar. And the change will be to start on the same day as the district, the 20th. And then the other change that would happen is since the district moved all of those early release days to Wednesday, Bryan Collegiate would not have any early release days on the calendar for that.
And what day does blend start?
They start on the 24th, which is that following Monday.
And that normally happens every year we start with
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes. And what's great about this is that it gives collegiate time to get those kids back on campus for a couple of days because they're going to have a lot to talk about how blend is different as well.
Right.
So they'll have a few days to get kids to get acclimated.
I move approval of Bryan Collegiate High School calendar.
Second.
A motion by Dr. Warrenberger, a second by Mrs. Binford. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Next up, we will move into technology services. One agenda items discuss and consider approval of the Operation Connectivity Interlocal Acquisition Agreement.
Yes, sir. So we have a bit of a surprise. release of information July 17th. I don't know if you've had time to review this since it just is hot off the press, where we had the opportunity to order some additional devices utilizing TEA in partnership with Region 4 funding through the governor's Operation Connectivity. So what they were trying to leverage is bulk buying for the state. And so they reached out to us and asked if we would like to be part of this. So as we were looking at numbers, as they were coming in from our response to the return to school form, we saw there were a lot of students requesting the online option. And so with this opportunity where there was reduced pricing, they were offering hotspots and paying for half of that cost of all these types of devices. So we went ahead and quickly filled out a response and have requested to work with Region 4 to add an additional 2,000 devices and 2,000 Chromebooks, 2,000 hotspots as a stopgap is what it is, and then 500 iPads. So as y'all seen kind of the results from our elementaries, you know that we'll probably need to roll out more devices than we originally thought. So what's also nice is the money that I've already spent. TEA is telling us they're also going to pay for half of that or potentially more.
No way.
I know, it's like I don't want to get too excited because I want to see the money.
Good news.
So I think the first step that we have to do to move forward with this purchase is say on Thursday, they released a brand new interlocal agreement with Region 4 being the management of this purchase. And they've given us some dates when they think they'll get out to us. So we're moving very quickly. For example, it came out Thursday and they need it back by the board approved by Tuesday. So anyway, I believe that you've all received that packet and hopefully you've seen those numbers. What's nice about this opportunity is we get more devices and we still will be, according to TEA, we anticipate to still be under that 1.8 that we allocated this summer for purchasing technology. So, very excited about this opportunity and seeking board approval for the interlocal agreement with Region 4.
Well, that was my question, is what about
Yes,
the
ma'am.
stuff we already purchased? And will those things be here?
Most likely they will not.
Okay.
So originally I thought if we get onto the Dell order as it's Dell, HP, lots of different devices, Apple. If we got onto that order, maybe as a bulk order, it would actually bump our order up faster. Originally Dell was telling us possibly October. Now we're hearing November, possibly December. As they said on the TEA call when they met with everyone, some states got in line ahead of us. And so we probably, and it's really a demand situation. Many of these parts come right out of China as far as the equipment to build the devices. And it really becomes to a shortage there is where the shortage is happening. Now we have heard of delays like this before, and then all of a sudden they show up early. So I think they're trying to give us worst case scenario. So
we're not going to end up with way too many devices. Okay.
Oh, no, sir. No.
Well, I just want to make sure. But then there's the other thing about the tower we're going to do. So are we still going to need all these hot spots? Are we not going to do the tower? Or what's going on with that?
We got our tower up on August 1st. And I was just reading as I was in this meeting that we had our first results back from some of our testing. So we're working with the company to kind of work through how do we get that connection working where it's strong, adding users. And so no, I still think that we should consider it, especially if this is kind of a shift in how we provide education in the future. Whether it's just for a pandemic or is this something that families will look for to have access at home. So I think it's a really good endeavor to keep moving toward that option. We did, the minimum for the hotspots was a 1 year, so that's all we signed up for. You could do multiple years. However, they even advertise the hotspots as a stopgap. They do not think it's a long-term solution either. And so we really want to keep investigating that path and make sure we do it the right way and not spend money and waste it on something. So I want to make sure as we put this up, and I don't know if any of y'all have driven by SFA, you may see our radio tower up there now broadcasting. And when we were testing our signal, we were at Milan. So you can kind of see the distance we're trying to hit with that option.
So Julie, I saw an article about TEA sponsoring Schoology.
Yes, ma'am. We did.
I was thinking we did.
So we're still hearing on if that's going to be a refund. Do they get to push that date for our end date of our contract and keep the money? So I think that's still all a little gray. But yes, we did have an approval. I think it was $90,000. That's about what that was for the 2 years. So I was glad they selected and could see that it was a good selection. I felt a little validated.
Julie, I know you're over transportation too, so this
Yes,
relates to
ma'am.
the hot spots.
Yes, ma'am.
Our school district is about 400 square miles,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
So there are lots of places where we serve students where they're never going to have access to a tower or fiber running.
Edge
channel.
is an example.
Where
Exactly.
yeah,
Yes.
so I see the hotspots as a stopgap, but also recognize that we're going to have places that may need that.
Absolutely. My in-laws live on Old Reliance Road, not far from Rudder, and they still cannot get good connectivity there. And so I think, as you start moving out into the county, you're exactly right. We do need a long-term solution. I teased them that I'd like to put a tower on their property. So, for free. So, yes, I think we do need to look for that long-term solution and keep plodding along. But I also want us to be careful as we do it, because I don't want to invest in something that we can't get our money back on. There's that sweet spot of, I don't want to pay more than what I would pay for a hotspot.
Sure.
So.
I move approval of the Operation Connectivity Interlocal Acquisition Agreement with Region 4 Education Service Center for technology purchase as presented.
I have a motion by Dr. Harlan, a second by Mrs. Binford. All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
It had a lot of words.
All right, and that will take us into business services. First up is discussion of the 2020-21 budget update.
So thank you, Mr. McCall. Try to stay on course today. A little different today, so trying to get back in the swing. I think you all have a copy of the printout as well. So sometimes it's easier to see when it's right in front of you than on the screen. We're getting started a little bit late this year with different things with budget and going through, and I'd like to complain to my cohorts in that about some of the things that I deal with and struggle, but you've heard today about all the struggles that all of them are going through and the things that we're all dealing with, and so it's just my cup of anger today. So I commend them all for all the work that they've done. You've heard all the good things that have gone on, and trying to proceed, do the best things that we can do. So with that said, going forward, we always try to keep our district goals in mind. The next slide, Matthew. And then our agenda for today. So we'll run through the budget timeline again and some of the challenges that we faced, our property tax rates, and values, and some other numbers. I would say there's been a few developments this year. Of course, many things changed with House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 2 as far as our property values and our property tax rates, some of those kind of things and how we do those. So, and then of course, COVID, like always, has caused some issues. Next slide, then. I guess do I have control? Sorry. No, it's not working. Okay, there we go. Sorry about our timeline. You can see where we are. We started preliminary property values in May. Kind of starts our process with getting those numbers together. We're down here today at the budget update 8/3/2020, and you'll notice there's an item there, the 8/1/20. That's a new item. Local property value survey is due to TEA, and then they use that to set our tier 1 tax rate. And we'll go over that a little bit more. And of course, we go through today and then into the public hearing and set the tax rate on 8/17. I hope everything continues on the way we're going. Some of the challenges going through this year, of course, all things COVID, we've heard nothing about anything else really except for that. And of course, that's involved in school year calendars, as you just heard, enrollment and attendance, our current year property values. There's been a struggle for, I'd like to commend Mr. Mark Price and the Brazos Central Appraisal District and all of the work that they're doing to try to get that done. With doing arbitrations and those kind of things and being limited to the number of people they could have in the building. Those kind of things have been a challenge for them. The TEA tax rate calculations that also commend Ms. Christy Rowe, the tax assessor collector, and her staff at the Brazos County Tax Offices. They've gone through and are working through this whole new process. And we found out Friday that we were working through trying to set our rates with her that the software that they use is not ready for districts that have 313 agreements. So another challenge that they've come across throughout this process. Other delays in insurance quotes and things. And then of course all the Corona Relief Fund, FEMA reimbursements, the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, which is ESSER, is another one. And all of those things have been put out there, and they're going to be beneficial to us, I believe. But just trying to figure out how do they correspond and correlate to our already set finances, and when will those things start to open up and getting applications in and all those kind of things, and how do we handle that in our current budgets and things have been some of the challenge. Estimated property values, normally we'd have certifieds by now, but they actually don't have to certify our values until, I believe, today will be the end of it, so they certify on the 5th. So these numbers are very close, as I understand. I'm talking to them on Friday. And so they're increased some. We actually are going to be at about a little over 6.5% property value increase. So that's a pretty strong number. We started out with a 4, maybe 5% is what we were thinking due to COVID reasons, but that's really holding strong on that area. This is the one I talked about before is new, the TEA local property value survey info. This is new that under Senate Bill 2 that we try to keep all the property tax rates in the state set a little bit closer to even. But basically what they've done through this process is we've submitted our 2019 appraisal roll and our 2020 appraisal roll, and that comes out to a percentage. They roll through that calculation. They take into account the comptroller's value, which is a little bit different. They adjust some things. But they're essential, their goal, if you get down to the bottom 2 lines, for the tax year 2020, the state compression rate, they call it, they're trying to get between those 2 numbers. So they want all the rates for the tier 1 set to 0.9164 or the minimum of 0.8247. And so when they run through our calculation at that point, it comes out to 0.8925. So we fall within that parameter. So that is where we would be. And then, so that's where you start with that. That's new this year. Then we send that into some other values and things to the property tax office. She starts working our calculations, and She actually emailed me last night a version handwritten of her calculations, trying to fill out the forms that the software is supposed to do for her. So she's working on that. She was still working on it this morning. So I appreciate her working with us on that. And just like, you know, a lot of the people that you've heard, we've talked about, they've stepped up and really helped us a lot. This is we talked about this a little bit, our estimated expenditures for the general fund 2020 and 21. We talked about it at the last meeting. We have made a couple of adjustments. We brought in here, we kind of talked to the finance committee a little bit about increasing the district share of the health insurance. We bumped that up a little bit more, and then we increase in the property insurance amount, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. So that comes to our preliminary general fund expenses, and then to the we get to our revenues. This is where we're set right now. And again, this is not final. Normally by this time we would be pretty close to final on these, but with our total property taxes and state revenue. I'd also mention we talked to CASBO and TDA. They put out a new template on Thursday to run through the state funding numbers. There was a couple of issues that needed to be resolved on that. They don't feel like it's going to be a major change, but again, you know, it's something we're working through and hopefully. So, I mean, I feel like this is where we are right now, but you know, taking into account also the whole harmlessness you talked about for the attendance for the first 6 weeks. That new template had a calculation in there based on, you know, we entered the numbers as they were for the last, supposed to be 3 years actually, is only the last 2 years. But so enter those numbers, and then that calculates through as to what our average daily attendance would be for the first 6 weeks periods. If we qualify for that, which we should. But then getting down to the estimated budget shortfall, the full rate is about 1.4 million. We have the teacher salary schedule step in there. Talked about raises of 1% for the others, admin, paras, and auxiliary, all our auxiliary staff. And then we've looked at a one-time payment of about 0.5% in December, which is that 560,000, which we've researched a little bit about that. That is perfectly fine as long as we do it as a budget line item as we set it now. There's discussion, and they've talked about you can try to tie it to, you know, enrollment, or you can try to tie it to you know, some other marker that you might hit, and that would trigger it. It gets into a lot of legal issues. They recommend against it, but it can be something that we could look at if we wanted to try to say that we would consider doing something to give it a little more if there was a sign. The debt service, of course, is a separate pool of money, separate tax rate based on our property tax values as we have them. The property tax rate of 28 cents would bring in about 25 million, 31,000. We have state revenue that also figures into that of 175,000. Our principal and interest due on our prior issues for our debt service is about 20,363,000. We have the capacity at this point to call some future debt. So we will consider that and bring something to y'all on the 17th meeting. We have a little later another item is we have Mr. Stephen Adams, who thankfully is being patient with us from Specialized Public Finance, and he's got some things on that he'll talk about with us and our debt structure as well. So estimated fees, and you can see we're probably just a little short. We have significant fund balance or substantial enough to cover that, so that would be fine. The school nutrition budget, we've worked through this. This is a little different. Normally, Ms. Ryrier, as most of you know, she's stepped up and fed many of our children through this whole process, and she runs a pretty tight ship out there. This has really thrown a wrench in her operations as the grab and go instead of serving. She went from serving like somewhere in the 12,000 meals a day to 12,000 a week. So during the when we went out in March. So we've adjusted those numbers some and what we can, but we're still trying to figure out how many children will actually eat in the school, how many will actually pick up the grab and go, as we call it, and that. So looking at those numbers, we're projecting about a $1.2 million deficit. She does have a significant fund balance that will cover that for this point. So we're not too concerned about that. We're hopefully that things will change and we'll all get back. COVID will get it under control or a vaccine or treatment or something and get back to more like a normal school year, and kids will be back in the school eating in the cafeteria. And that's really all I have on that issue. If you have any questions or anything that we need to cover, again, we'll finish up these and we'll try to have the rest of the data to you prior to the August 17th meeting, so that we can make sure we're all on the same page with those.
I know I have a question, but if anybody else wants to. Basically, as Mr. Wayne mentioned, and as Ms. Johnson was presenting, there are a number of different elements that are coming into play from the state kicking in additional money to pay for technology, the state Schoology contract, and how that plays out. And I think we're all still waiting for that. I guess my main thing is as that comes back, we had passed out of fund balance to spend up through X, and I think they had. We applied budget for Schoology and that type of stuff. Do we have a feel is that money going to go back into the fund balance if it's unused, or are we going to leave it there with technology to expand upon?
Yeah, I think as I would understand it, it would come back and flow back into eventually into fund balance if it's received by the end of the year. It would just make up that difference and we would not use the fund balance, but it would go back into the fund balance, and I would think any other further purchases or anything would still have to come to the board and be approved, and just similar to normal. I haven't really touched on those, other than those are items that are pending, they're out there. The FEMA, for example, reimbursements from that's an ongoing claim at this point. I guess they're still an ongoing disaster. So that application remains open until it's declared over. So that could go on for quite some time. The ESSER grant, of course, that's the one that we're not actually getting any money. I'll bring something at the Monday meeting on the 17th, because we're going to have to do a budget amendment to adjust for TEA is going to reduce our ADA by a certain amount to reduce our state funding by that particular amount, and then it'll be made up by the ESSER fund. But we're going to have to. It's going to be a back and forth between two different funds. So I'll bring you something that'll kind of show that, and then the Corona Relief Fund is an ongoing, and the applications, I believe, have just recently opened, and I think we're probably about ready to file our first claim. So that's a long way of saying, I guess all those things are ongoing, and they will just flow back into fund balance. and be available for future.
I think one of the main concerns, I don't want to say this is a concern, but just one of the main urgencies that I know I feel is making sure we have a clear message going out to the teachers that the scheduled step is there within the within the proposed budget, and some additional concerns, but the full extent of that won't be available till the budget is passed and until the budget is approved in the next, because I know that is starting to become a question that a number of teachers have had. They're used to seeing that information by now, and so I think they're starting to get a little concerned there. So I think just like everything else is, be patient. We're working on it. We're trying to finalize everything.
And as you know, I think one of the reasons that we held was trying to get as many pieces together as we could, but that the insurance, plays a role in that too. So that's why the finance committee has spent time looking at that and how would that impact people. And then what if the district paid more of a contribution, which affects our bottom line. And those are also benefits to our employees, but not 100% of the employees, because not every employee takes our insurance, although the majority do. Far over the majority. It's about, 80% or something? It's a pretty high number that do. But it's just, we wanted to make sure we could do it.
Thank you. We'll move down into discussing, consider approval of a resolution to budget and prioritize state compensatory funds.
So thank you. This is an item that we've processed for several years, but basically the Texas Education Code, House Bill 5, requires us to allocate or prioritize the state compensatory ed funds to accelerated instruction in subject areas where a student has performed unsatisfactorily on an end of course exam. And so what this resolution does is prioritizes those funds to support that additional cost in a higher per student allocation for state comp ed funds in high schools. It funds our summer testing for retests and supplemental software that offers data-driven differentiated instruction. And I know that Dr. Ibarra's team puts together a report and should be doing the one for last year's resolution that we passed. They'll be doing that reporting on how that worked and what the results of that were coming up shortly.
I move approval of the attached resolution that budgets and prioritizes state compensatory funds to support the additional costs associated with unsatisfactory performance on an end of course exam as presented.
The motion by Dr. Harlan, the second by Dr. Warrenberger. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, and we'll move down into general property, general liability, and automobile insurance.
Thank you, sir. I think y'all have copies of was attached to the budget, copies of the quotes that we received on this. The current policy for our property and general liability automobile insurance expires at the end of August. We've gone through the process requesting quotes for coverage for these types of insurance and reached out to all major insurers that write this. We actually received only 2 quotes. 12 declined to provide a quote. You have those on the right-hand side of the front page. You can see some pretty significant insurance companies that did not quote it. And several companies are doing away with or not writing these types of insurance anymore. So with companies discontinuing less options, that's a driving force to the prices as well. Other things that are causing this, of course, the property damage and nationwide and increased costs in construction and things are causing increase in prices as well. Our recent hail damage from the storm in May is a prime example, and that was part of the reason we're delayed in getting some of these quotes. Just the timing of it was not good. The expiring policy was written through Texas Political Subdivision, or TPS, and the total premium was $934,000 for all of those coverages. They submitted the lowest renewal quote was $1,299,000, which is a significant increase, about 39%. We'd anticipated, I had built into the budget projections about a 20 to 25% increase based on the current market and our current loss claims for the past year. The current quote that we have is very similar in coverage. Most of the coverages and limits and things are almost identical to the current policy, with the exception of the deductibles as far as windstorm or hail damage. That's the increase to the $500,000 per occurrence, or 3% per location for hail.
So occurrence is an event, right? So the hailstorm, even though a lot of our buildings were damaged, that is one occurrence.
Yes, ma'am. So the current hailstorm that we had, that was one occurrence. So we had the expiring policy had a $250,000 deductible per occurrence. So what we're working on with that claim is everything falls under that one deductible, which is that is significant in that. In researching some of these, the renewal rates and the deductibles and things, we've checked in several large ISDs around the state. Our rates in this policy falls probably within a mid-range of those. And I kind of listed a few of them, but just the range, districts with a range of $243 million to $2 billion in total insured value. And then a range of deductibles 1% to 5%. Had a rate of starting at 0.1195 per $100 of total insured value up to 0.2607. And our rate, we have about $563 million in total insured value, with a hybrid deductible that falls kind of in that category. And our renewal rate was 0.1934, so we're in that group. It's not a good situation, but we're in the same situation with districts across the state. So it's really kind of an insurance crisis, I think, throughout the country and the nation. But the option is to try to self-insure more, which these increased premium or increased deductibles do. We do have committed fund balance, I think significant enough to handle those, but we're going to review that, and we'll bring that back to you on the 17th. That we annually review that and bring the committed fund balance to you all, so that we can take a look at that, and we'll take that into account when we rework that to make sure that we feel that committed fund balance would cover that deductible.
I'm just, I guess, looking for any insight that you have about this, because I can understand rates going up. I guess I have a harder time understanding why they wouldn't say, okay, this is going to be more expensive, but so here it is, instead of we're just not even going to offer. So especially if you got TASB on here, they're not even going to say, well, we're not even going to give you a high figure, we're not going to give you any figure, because I assume they don't even know necessarily, or do they, what we're currently paying. It's not like they're providing that, are they, or are they?
I don't, I'm not sure if they have information on that.
They're provided with loss runs. Right. And they know what our claims are.
And they just know the claims. They don't know what you're paying currently in terms of premium. That's information that's not shared with them. So just based on the loss experience, they decided not to quote this year.
Thanks.
And
We can
as they did
control the
mention,
weather.
it's something that they will reevaluate next year, to potentially offer terms for next year.
Well, as I said, I can understand rates going up, the premiums going up, I just have a hard time understanding we're not going to throw something at you that maybe turns out to be not as bad as somebody else, because this is obviously extremely limited on the options here for us. And again, it is what it is, but I thought maybe it's not a matter of they didn't have enough time or something like that. They had plenty of time to evaluate it.
No, sir, they had plenty of time.
All right.
We actually were supposed to have these quotes just about the time of hail hit, right? And so that delayed and everybody, and I don't really understand that, but I'm that was how many years has it been since we had any kind of property damage at all? But the fact that one hit and they want to wait and see, kind of slow play it to see, how much is the claim going to be and what is the damage amount to and all those kind of things. So it's just the timing on that was not good, combined with the fact that the market is increasing. It's not good.
That's what it is.
So I move approval of the Texas Political Subdivision Self-Insurance Fund, TPS, as the property, automotive, and general liability insurance carrier as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Mrs. Blaine, a second by Mrs. Waller. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, and we will move down to discussing information in regards to a potential bond and related financing.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I have Mr. Stephen Adams here with Specialized Public Finance. It helps us maintain our debt structure, and that I would like to ask him to go ahead and talk about this with us, the bonding capacity that we have, and the referendum things that we are going to talk about a little bit later. So,
Thank you, President, Superintendent, members of the board. Let me make sure I understand how this works.
I'm not sure what that.
If you aim it at the map, it will work.
Oh, so there it is. Okay.
No, I'll get it for you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here. And I want to say I've been to a lot of meetings lately. This is the only one where I've seen the staff answer not only broad questions, but every detail. So just from an observer, that's something that I haven't seen a lot of times. So anyway, so we've done an analysis for a $175 million bond election, similar to what we had done for the May election. If you'll recall, in May, we said that you could do this in 2 tranches and at the same tax rate. And now we're saying you can drop it a half a penny. Probably we could do more, but there are some uncertainties out there. But the reason that we can now drop it a half a penny versus being level or threefold. One, we've got updated assessed value information, that growth at 6%. That has helped the numbers. Number two, we ran this at a 3%. If you sold those bonds today, it would be 2%. Before that, we were much higher than that. Interest rates just keep falling. And by the way, that's what's trashing the insurance company's balance sheets. They can't make any money on investments that match the duration of their liabilities. And then finally, as you saw earlier in the presentation, we continue to call bonds at the current tax rate. Every time we do that, that just creates new bonds at the same tax rate. And we'll be doing another, I believe, 4.85 million at your meeting on the 17th. So you combine those factors, and we believe you can drop the tax rate. Now, the big question that we have about moving forward, every appraisal district is behind right now. They can't get values to customers and to their customers or the districts and the cities. And there's a couple of things that are causing that. One, they're not working in their office. Number two, this is the year that Senate Bill 2 came in, which was already going to be problematic. And number three, they have more protests by most places, 2 or 3 times more than they've ever had. However, the state law says it's valued on January 1. And I know some appraisal districts are forgetting that law on purpose and considering values even after COVID, which we're not supposed to. But even if they do, what that means is it's going to impact people's next year values, because it'll be January 1st of next year that we get next year's values. You know, to me, Bryan College Station is probably more immune to this than some other areas. I think your economy's still good, but there's probably going to be 20% fewer students at A&M. I mean, it's going to have some impact on businesses. So that's kind of an unknown or an uncertainty about why we don't think you could lower it more than 0.5%, as well as interest rates have really never been this low. So when we did our structure, we assumed we would issue in 2021, $110 million on a 25-year amortization, a little bit structured around your current debt, structured around to keep your tax rate at a level where it is now. And then in 2022, we would issue the remaining amount, either all of it or some of it, depending on how construction and our ability to spend the money is at that time. And so next slide, please. And this is your debt structure. And with your tax rate overlaid being the red line. So you can see your debt goes up a little bit, but your values are going up, and then your overall tax rate will be coming down. So not only are you in good shape for this election, but you're going to be in good shape for an election in the future as well. So everything from a debt perspective is in good shape. Hopefully, we'll be able to continue calling bonds as well. Now, one thing about this that I would also like to note, to your discussion about the fund balance, what we're hearing is that in next year's budget at the state level, they are looking at the billions of dollars in fund balances at ISDs, and they're taking that into account when they're doing the budget. And my understanding is, talking to people who are watching the process, they're looking at days fund balance, days expenditures and fund balance, and if you happen to have more than a certain number of days, which is yet to be determined or thought about, they're going to have those districts spending on fund balance. So that could have rating implications, but if they do it correctly, it shouldn't, because a lot of districts have more than the minimum amount that the rating agencies require for fund balance. But your budgets moving forward, the state may be dipping into your fund balance. So something to consider there that's, again, out of your control. Next slide. I bring this up. On the far right to that, you see it looks like there's a sewing machine pattern. With the bond market was in complete disarray, the interest rate estimates probably were only estimates. There was not a bond market for a few weeks, a couple, 3 weeks after the COVID hit. The high yield market is still not back yet completely. But there is a possibility that if stimulus slows at some point before you get your bonds issued, rates could come back up. So that's another risk. I just wanted you to see how the trend of the rates is still down, but they're on the far right. It was pretty dramatic. That's really all I had. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Someday, can you make a chart that shows what we've done through the years to get
When you sold the bonds each year?
Yeah.
I can get one of those to you, yes.
Just because it illustrates all of our defense force.
Well,
I mean, you kept giving us good advice for the years, so.
well, I always appreciate
Without your advice.
your kind comments, and I've instructed my daughter to look for one of your classes. She's starting. So that ain't. I'll look for it.
So basically, just to summarize and make sure it's clear in my mind, basically we're going to do the same thing that we had originally planned to call in May. But we're going to call it November, and it's actually going to be a lower tax rate.
Starting next year, yes.
Yeah.
Not this tax rate you're about to set, but the next one.
After the fund.
Right.
Okay, so I guess what I'm, yes, right.
Yeah, the way it would have gone, if we would have called it in May, we would have probably already sold some bonds, and we would projected that it would have gone up, the 7/8 of a cent. So this
Right,
year,
that's fine.
yeah, what we were going to set would have been 28.875 or whatever.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
for 28.875. So what we're thinking now is if we pass in November and then sell the bonds for next year, so then next year's tax rate, instead of being 28 cents, would actually be 27.5. We should be able to structure it so we can do that.
By law, it's still gonna have to say, this is a tax increase. And
It is.
Yeah, that's what it is. I guess what I really want to hear from you is yeah, these are great numbers, so tell us what the voter attitude is gonna be in November. You do know.
Well, I do know this. Most all of our school districts that we're going to call in May are calling in November. The cities, they're still trying to figure out, they get up to 40% of their revenues for some cities in sales tax. They're mostly putting theirs back to May before they can understand their budget. So everybody's asking the same question, but by and large, the school districts there's going to be a lot of bond elections in November. So I think most of the ones I talk to feel pretty comfortable that they're going to be supported by their constituents.
Thank you. And I would just add, unfortunately, superintendents are hearing the same information about the possibility of using our fund balances and what the fund balances equate to, I don't know, 14 billion or some really large number across the state. It's a huge number. And that's kind of a rainy day fund.
Correct.
So we're hearing that same advice, and it's disturbing.
Work hard to get to
Yes.
that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience.
Sure.
All right.
And thank you for the compliment about the meetings you've been in and what you heard presented in the meetings. And that goes back to what I was telling Dr. Merrill about how, I think between all the board members, we figured out there's like 13 or 16 kids of our own that are either in the district or graduated from the district. And so all these decision making, Mr. B saw too. His daughter had just a beautiful write-up in the paper the other day. And so we take all this to heart and we treat everything we do like we, as if it's our family. So I think that has a whole lot to do with what you hear in today's meeting.
Well, it really is impressive from just me sitting here watching it, because literally some places are deciding at the meeting level because basic questions weren't answered or thought about. So.
Okay.
All right, next is we have 3 items for local governments. all pertaining to fall election. The first item up is consider approval of a joint interlocal agreement between Brazos County and Bryan ISD for the November 3rd, 2020 general election. This would cover the Board of Trustees election and a bond referendum if it is called for, or the next two items within the city limits of Bryan and the school boundaries with Brazos County. Brazos County and Bryan ISD will hold elections the same day.
I'll move approval of the joint interlocal agreement between Brazos County and Bryan ISD for the November 3rd, 2020 election.
Second.
A motion by Dr. Warrenberger, a second by Dr. Harland. All in favor?
Aye.
Item 2 is consideration of approval of an amendment and restated order calling a bond election to be held by the Bryan Independent School District, making provision for the conduct of a joint election and resolving other matters, incidents relating to such elections due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Bryan Independent School District postponed its previously called bond referendum scheduled for the May 5th, 2020 election until November 2020. This order declares the district's desire to move forward with the delayed bond referendum on the November 3rd, 2020 ballot.
I move that the Board of Trustees adopt an amended and restated order calling a bond.
Second. I have a motion by Mr. Stasny, a second by Mrs. Benford. All in favor?
Aye.
And the last item is consider approval of the adoption of order and notice of the Board of Trustees election for November 3rd, 2020. To meet the requirements of the Texas Education Code and the Texas Education Code and the Texas Election Code, the attached order and notice must be adopted by the school board in order to hold the school trustee election on November 3rd, 2020.
I move approval of the adoption of the order and notice for the November 3rd, 2020 Board of Trustees election.
Second.
I have a motion by Mrs. Waller, a second by Mrs. Benford. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. At this time, do we have any closed? Okay, at this time, we do not have any closed session items, so if there's no objection, we'll adjourn.
We go.